If you're a small business owner looking to grow or expand your business, check out OnDeck Business Loans. OnDeck offers business loans online from $5,000 to $500,000, and their simple application process only takes 10 minutes. Unlike banks, they'll give you a decision quickly, and funding is as fast as one day. Get a free consultation with an OnDeck loan advisor. Visit ondeck.com/podcast.
This is the Breakfast Leadership Podcast. Boundaries or burnout, you make the choice. Here's your host, Michael Levitt. Welcome to another episode of the Breakfast Leadership Podcast. I've got Nick Elvery with us today. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks ever so much for having me on, Michael.
Great to have you on. So you work with CEOs and you help them bring out their absolute best so they can get the peak performance out of their roles, which obviously benefits their career and the organizations they work. So tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you got into this role.
Sure. So my backstory is one of just over a decade of addiction to hard drugs and alcohol. And coming out the other side of that journey has taught me a great deal about myself, but also about what it takes to make lasting change, why habits are so important, and a plethora of other things that you can probably imagine. And alongside this journey, from addiction to where I am now, I've always had this fascination with the human experience. Like, why do some people go out there and create a life they love and seem to effortlessly get the results that they want? And then why do other people, like I did for so long, it's like smashing their head against a brick wall, trying to get results, but just not achieving? And, the combination of coming out the other side of the drug addiction, having this passion for performance and wanting to understand the human model, understand why we do things, has led to sort of the natural progression of where I am now, which is helping CEOs, C-level executives to perform at a much higher level than they're currently able to do so. And I'm sure we'll jump into a huge amount of what we do around that and how that works.
Yeah, it's always great when you're an executive, because oftentimes, and I'm sure you've realized this in the people that you work with, is they get to that level and then they realize, wait a minute, the training and everything that I've learned to get me here won't keep me here. It's a whole new ball game, a whole new vantage point, you name it. It's a completely different world when you are leading an organization, when you've rose through the ranks and used to be one of those important cogs to help move the organization along. Now you are the one directing it, and you're like, okay, where's the instruction manual? Did the last CEO leave it? And they look, and there's nothing in the desk except maybe a salt packet, or maybe a ketchup packet, or a pencil, and maybe a pen. We'll see. But other than that, it's like, well, congratulations, you're the new CEO. Good luck, and there you go. So what are some of the things that you encounter with these CEOs that want to go all out and get the best performance out of themselves? What are some of the hurdles and challenges that you commonly see with these people?
So it might be useful for me to give you an insight into how we approach it and what metrics we use, and then we can sort of go from there. So we use a combination of advanced biometrics. So think of something like a Fitbit, but on steroids, that isn't available to the general public. And what this gadget does is allows us to track in real time heart rate variability, which ultimately can be transferred to stress and recovery. So what we understand is the term stress is a term that's bounced around a lot these days. I feel stressed, but it's often something that we can't graphically represent. We can't on a piece of paper. It's normally, how stressed are you from 1 to 10, right? Which isn't a very good gauge of anything. And what we do with this device is we actually manage to print out a complete 3-day graph of where you are from a stress and recovery response and what you've been doing throughout a day. So you can actually see where you are recovering during the day, if you are at all, how well your sleep is recovering or not, what the balance between the two is, because stress is not innately an issue. It's only an issue when there isn't the balanced recovery that comes along with it. So we start there. We also take a blood sample from every client, and we have the whole panel look through by a doctor, and we get a really clear understanding of what's going on with their biology right then and there. So see if there are any red flags that pop up, and we can then correlate that information together. We do some DNA testing as well, which gives us some insights into some more information around what your biology is predisposed to in some areas. And really, this gives us a very clear picture of what's really going on, because what we find with CEOs, and I deal mostly with men, but what we find is there's this very sort of everything's fine, I'm okay, Jack type attitude. But actually what's really going on underneath in the biology speaks very, very differently to their reaction. So it's a really interesting way of being able to get the most important parts of our health and our performance, actually have it down on paper, and then use that data and obviously retrack as we continue through the program with the clients to see what needs to be changed and what changes are actually making a difference. Because oftentimes we try to make too many changes at once, and then it's very difficult to understand, well, which one of those things that we change actually made a difference. So we actually methodically go through and say, well, we can have a look at the sleep as an example. The recovery is very, very poor. There's maybe two glasses of wine before an evening can actually decimate the quality of sleep. So for people where performance matters and recovery matters, then it's really interesting insights into what's really going on for them.
That's incredible, because oftentimes with many leadership type of programs, they're doing a deep dive in how they spend their time, and also perspectives and decision making, even personality tests and things like that. But the fact that you go into the biology of a CEO and determine what is going on with them from a physical standpoint, can really dictate as to where these organizations or these leaders can really make those adjustments, because it's very individualistic, I would think, on how some people are wired, for a lack of a better term, and what things they can do. Because otherwise, oftentimes you just say, okay, we're going to do this blanket exercise, and you follow these 12 steps, and then you'll be a better CEO, which they do work, but it may be a situation where that CEO, quite frankly, only needs 2 or 3 of those 12 steps, and then he or she can save the 9 steps that they really don't need help on, and focus that time and energy to strengthen those 2 or 3 areas that they need help in.
That's exactly it. It's so individualized. It has to be, no longer of a days really. And we're getting away from this of blanket recommendations for someone to perform better. You can't say that one diet fits all. You can't say one routine fits all, because it's just absolute nonsense. Your biology is totally different. There's so many factors that make us up, and you can't give someone a load of people the same advice. And which is why I love the approach that we've taken here, is because it really does hone down on the individual, and not only have a look at their biology, but actually see what's really going on with their stress data. And what we found is what people's perception is. So a lot of the time, for example, our clients will say, oh, I felt like I had a really good night's sleep. Then we look at the data and it's quite the opposite. So our actual perception and our idea and our level of awareness to what's really going on with our biology is usually pretty inaccurate. So going on gut feeling and those sorts of parameters within this context aren't very good indicators of being able to improve.
Yeah, I can imagine where everybody thinks, so I got a great night's sleep, and then you pull out the sleep test. It's like, no, you woke up like 12 times, and they didn't even remember doing that. You tossed and turned, and you flipped your pillow 18 times, and everything else like that. Now, quick question. What's the reaction when you're sitting down with a CEO and you're saying, okay, we're going to be doing all this, and then you tell them, okay, we're going to get some blood work. I'm sure they probably look at you at first going, what? Why in the world are you asking for, blood work? Because, they look around, it's like, did I go to the physician's office? No, I'm talking to Nick, you may be a doctor, you might not be, but it's like, no, that wasn't the reason why I'm coming here. So what, how do you how do you explain to them, why these tests are so important?
Well, it's an interesting conversation because a lot of CEO clients that I've spoken to have either had tests like this already. Like a lot of the people that are interested in what we do are already have already gone down, similar avenues, or something of the similar nature. I mean, there's no one else doing what we're doing in this type of package for CEOs at the moment that I know of. But they have an interest in performance. They've had an interest in. So actually, for a lot of them, it's quite interesting, and it piques their interest rather than it being a sort of a stopping point. And also, when we go through our lead generation process, I'm very clear about the process and how it works, and it's all documented within the brochure that we send them, so they're very clear from word go how it works. But for me, you're not going to be able to get the full picture without that bit of information. And I think the technology it's so exciting to see where the technology is going, because in the next 5 to 10 years, I think there'll be a lot more of this type of service available, hopefully to everyone, that will enable us to really get a clear picture of what's going on with our biology and what will help and what won't help. Because, what it's like in the modern day with the internet especially, there's so many different types of information out there around supplementation, diet, exercise, stress management, the whole works, that it can't all be right, and it's a lot of it is just blanket information which isn't specific to the person.
Well, I see one of the many benefits, and I'm with you. I love that this would be available to everyone, and not just to CEOs, but and I'm sure you've talked about this, is when you get the DNA makeup and what makes you tick and what your stressors are and all of these things, you can fine tune to the point of knowing what type of role is best for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you get to that, then all of a sudden, from the job market and applying for jobs and things like that, you get a better analogy of, okay, these are the types of work or jobs that are good for me. And it really narrows down your focus. And then from an employer standpoint too, again, depending, and this comes into privacy laws and everything else, but it's a case where you post your availability on some website and you have some type of a score or rating, whatever this stuff comes up, and people can say, okay, I'm looking for people that have this makeup because they do well in this type of role. It would streamline the hiring process. It would streamline applying for jobs, because when you talk to anybody from the Gen Y or millennial generation, they despise the traditional way of applying for jobs. And I'm a Gen Xer, and I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with them on it. I think it's asinine, it's backwards, and it's just, you go through all of these hoops of fire to, it's easier to find a spouse or a partner than it is to find a job sometimes. And it's just like insane on what organizations make people do to agree to partner up and work on a particular project or career path. So I see all types of potential on this to better align workforces with skills and match them up better for organizations. Because if you have an organization where everyone is operating at their peak, imagine what that organization could do.
Absolutely. And I think also within that is the idea that you can actually, with this data, stress data especially, you can actually see what the optimal routine is. So for example, you can have a look at, when do you normally have your important meetings? Well, I have them in the afternoon. Well, actually what we can see from here is that you have a really high stress response for doing them in the afternoon. And we can see from your diet and your biology that actually you don't react well to the foods you're eating at the moment. So if we can switch around your diet and maybe drop carbs, depending on who the person is, it's all different for everyone, and drop carbs and maybe move that meeting to the morning when you have lesser stress and better recovery, then you're going to get a more optimal result. And the same with things like workouts. A lot of people put their workouts very close to bed, which for a lot of people can actually be detrimental to their sleep quality. So, okay, well, can we actually move that workout to maybe the morning, make it shorter, more efficient and effective, and have it in the morning and see what that does? So that's the beauty of the technology, is we can say, right, well, this is what we're trying to aim for. We're trying to aim for a great recovery, good stress recovery balance. let's take one factor to start with and see what happens when we do that. And then over time, we have this really clear roadmap of what really works well for that person and what really doesn't work well.
And again, that just makes life so much easier for everybody involved. It reduces stress. It prevents burnout. Because if you are operating at a state where you are not stressing out too much or minimizing the amount of stress that you're encountering over a short-term and long-term period of time, the likelihood of you burning out diminishes rapidly. And also, too, it makes your home life easier because you can kind of de-stress a little bit quicker, because I know oftentimes people go home from work and they have to debrief and change from it, and I'm always of the opinion if we can somehow significantly reduce that, where people go home and they can just be home and do whatever they want to do in their their home time, and not spend so much time thinking about what transpired during the workday. Again, it just makes for a better, wholesome life experience. So,
absolutely.
So, so if an executive comes to you and says, I'm interested in being a peak CEO because I want to be my absolute best, and I know that I'm not at this point right now. What are some areas, without giving trade secrets away, of course, what are some things that you initially do with these people first? I know you had indicated you do the blood work and all of that, but I'm assuming you don't take everybody. So, what are some factors that you're looking at for executives that would be interested in exploring this?
So I think the key thing for me is always recovery. So it's like people talk about overtraining with athletes especially. You could, in theory, train 5 times a day if you recovered effectively, right? Because your recovery is in essence everything. It's when your body repairs, it's when it does all the processes that it needs to do to make sure that you're optimal for the next day. So my process involves a lot of different things, but if you were to take one part of your life and really go to town on making it the most effective, then it would always be sleep. And what we find is that watching TV before bed completely decimates sleep. Drinking a glass or 2 of wine before bed has the same sort of effect. And again, this will vary from person to person. Some people are affected more by the blue light from the television, and some people are affected more by alcohol, and it depends how close to bed, and a whole range of other things. But if you can look at what's causing you to sleep poorly and get some decent data around your sleep, then you're going to gain a huge amount of performance, because a lot of the clients, as I say, they'll report that they slept really well that night. And that could just be the fact that they've come out of sleep in the morning at the top of the sleep cycle, where you feel a little bit more awake and less groggy. So it's very, that level of perception isn't very accurate, is what we're finding. So to answer your question, I think the key thing to start with is to aim for sleep. If you can get that dialed in, that will make a huge difference. And then have a look at your diet. And you can, if you don't want to go down the route of working with me and working with something similar services to what we offer, then start recording what's going on for you from an energy level. You can make a simple spreadsheet or a note on your phone to say, what are your energy levels like throughout the day? Like, what sort of foods work well for you? And you're going to start to get some basic data, but at least it's data that you can start to utilize.
Yeah, for somebody that lost almost 30 pounds last year.
Wow.
And it's been weight that I've been trying to lose for well over a decade. And it wasn't, it was weight that, extra weight that I'd been carrying for a long time. And finally reached that plateau where I'm like, okay, I need to do something about this, because the older I get, the harder it is to, for your metabolism and your body to lose the weight, because your body's going, okay, I guess we need to carry this around. So I made, some changes, and and I also had patience, knowing that this wasn't going to be something that was going to happen overnight, because I didn't put the weight on overnight. But by doing that, it improved my sleep. And, and by improving my sleep, it improved my awareness, performance, and all of that, just by simply changing the fuel that I was putting in my body. And I know for a fact, and I'm one that keeps track of what I eat and energy levels and whatnot. And I know by going through that exercise what foods agree with me and which ones I need to run far, far away from, no matter how tasty they are, because I know what it's going to do to me, and I don't. The short-term joy of the flavor of the food is definitely outweighed by the long-term effects of sleep, sluggishness, everything else that I encountered with that. So, it's one of those things where I think a lot of people, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of people think that making changes and being a peak performer is going to take huge changes, and for some people it might, but for many of us it's subtle shifts in how we approach things and what we eat and our sleep patterns, and changing a couple things here and there can make a just triumphant change in our lives.
I mean, I think of it, you look at it this way, it depends where you are on that scale of performance already. So if you're low down on the ladder of level of performance and you're looking to increase from, I'm making these numbers up obviously, but from 20% to 80%, that's a big jump. And to get those levels of performance increases typically don't need huge amounts of work. They just need a few fundamental foundational changes. But it's when we get to the top 20% and 10% or 5%, then that's when, like anything in life, it becomes trickier and more detailed to actually pull those levels of performance out. So it entirely depends on where that client is on that performance ladder.
Yeah, this is absolutely amazing stuff, and I highly recommend CEOs and executives, take a long, hard look at the services that you're offering, because I think it would dramatically change themselves, both from a performance standpoint, but also from a career standpoint. Because if you're a peak performer, you're going to rise up, and then additional opportunities for larger organizations or your dream organization will come into reach because you are at your optimum best.
Yeah.
So Nick, I enjoyed our time today. Where can people find out more about you and the awesome work that you're doing?
So all of me is over on nickelvery.com. I'm sure you'll have a link in your show notes for that as well. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I don't use any other social media platforms. But yeah, so nickelvery.com, or just search my name on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And yes, definitely audience will have that information in the show notes. Nick, great talking with you today. I learned a lot. And even though I had some prior knowledge of the awesome work you're doing, I picked up quite a few new things and continued the awesome work.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you. And until next time, everybody, be well. Hey, it's Michael again. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. If you're like many people, you're dealing with some significant stress and possibly approaching burnout. I know how you feel. In 2009, my burnout led to a year of worst-case scenarios. I do not want that to happen to you. If you go to breakfastleadership.com, you can register for a free webinar on burnout prevention, as well as get a free checklist to have successful mornings. Start off each day the right way. Again, that's at breakfastleadership.com. Also, since you are a loyal podcast listener, I'm asking you to like, rate, and review my podcast on iTunes. I look at all the reviews and appreciate your comments, and it helps other potential listeners discover the content I have on the show. I appreciate you, and thanks again for listening.